My husband left me standing in a downpour on the edge of Highway 19, 27 miles from the nearest town. He didn't yell or threaten. He just unlocked the door and said, "Out." I stepped onto the wet pavement in heels and a dress still damp from the spilled wine at dinner. Then he drove off, taillights fading like the end of a cruel joke. The rain wasn't even the worst part. Before I continue narrating the story of Amanda Mitchell, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. We'd been at a client dinner, one I helped him prep for with spreadsheets and market forecasts he'd later pass off as his own. I noticed the way he kept checking his phone under the table, smiling at texts he refused to show me. I asked about the unfamiliar name that had appeared on our joint Amex statement, Melanie. 2 charges at La Perla, 1 at the Grandview Hotel. He smiled like I was a child confusing fantasy for fact. "Ask one more question," he said, "and I'll remind you who makes this life possible." His name is Carter, and once upon a time he was charming. Ivy League credentials, hedge fund founder, the kind of man who made people lean in at dinner parties. But the charm had a clock on it, one that expired the second I stopped agreeing with everything he said. I used to be a senior analyst at Pembroke Financial before I retired to support his dream. He liked me smarter than his mistresses, but quieter than his ego. We hadn't even made it home when the argument started in the car. I asked if he'd really spent $4,800 at the hotel spa, and he said I was acting emotional again. Then he mentioned teaching me a lesson, that a long walk in the rain would bring clarity. He pulled into an abandoned rest stop just off the highway, one I now realize he must have scouted beforehand. "Walk off the crazy," he said, "or get back in and say you're sorry." I didn't get back in. I didn't cry or plead or even hesitate. I just stepped out, shut the door behind me, and stood still as he pulled away. My hand was already in my coat pocket, feeling for the cold metal edge of the device Marcus had given me. A discreet voice recorder, already rolling. Marcus had been my private security for just over 7 months, hired under the pretense of keeping the house safe after a break-in 3 neighborhoods over. In reality, I'd hired him myself through a referral from my divorce attorney. He wasn't just muscle. He was trained, observant, former military intelligence with a degree in forensic psychology. Carter thought Marcus worked for him, and that was his first mistake. The second was assuming I was alone. I walked toward the edge of the lot, where an old vending machine flickered under a broken awning. Carter had left me with no bag, no phone, and no umbrella, thinking, I guessed, that humiliation would do what love no longer could. But what he didn't know was that Marcus had been tailing us in an unmarked SUV the entire night. When the Mercedes pulled away, Marcus waited exactly 30 seconds before his headlights blinked once through the trees. That was our signal. The rain intensified, turning from drizzle to downpour in under a minute. I took off my heels, letting my bare feet slap against the wet pavement. I didn't run. I walked slowly, like someone rehearsing a scene they'd waited months to play. I could hear Marcus's steps behind me before I saw him, always quiet, always calm. He held out a dry coat and a flask of hot coffee. "He's headed southbound," Marcus said, glancing at his watch. "Exactly as we expected. You okay?" I nodded and took a sip from the flask. The warmth hit me harder than the whiskey inside it. "His mistake," I said quietly, "leaving me here." Back in the SUV, I peeled off the wet dress and changed into jeans and a hoodie from the go bag Marcus kept in the trunk. My second phone, powered off until now, buzzed to life with messages from the legal team. "We're greenlit," Rebecca's text read. "Everything's in motion. We file tomorrow at 10. Carter thought he'd taught me a lesson, but really, he'd signed a confession. The recorder in my coat had captured his words, crystal clear. The statements about punishment, control, reminding me of my place, all of it admissible, all of it damning. Marcus had installed audio pickups in the house 6 months ago and cameras 2 months after that. By the time Carter had begun gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind, I'd already started recording. We reached the safe house in under 40 minutes, Marcus bypassing the interstate for a network of back roads he knew well. The building looked like an old bed and breakfast on the outside, but inside it was state-of-the-art security and silence. Only Rebecca knew the address, and even then, only under duress. The storm raged outside, but inside the walls were thick and warm, like an unspoken promise. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to exhale. The email came through at midnight. Carter had initiated a transfer of $200,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Valentina, our forensic accountant, flagged it instantly and froze the transaction midstream. We'd been tracking his movements for weeks, waiting for a large sum to leave the joint business account. That was the financial nail in the coffin. Embezzlement from shared assets. We had him. Rebecca sent through the preliminary filing, emergency divorce petition citing financial abuse, abandonment, and psychological manipulation. The timestamp on the documents mattered. Everything had to appear reactive, not premeditated. The law didn't care about truth. It cared about optics, paperwork, and timing. Tomorrow we walk into court like victims, Rebecca had said. But by tomorrow night, he'll be the one begging for mercy. I lay awake in the guest bedroom listening to the rain, feeling the old weight start to lift. Carter had no idea how far I'd come, how long I'd planned, or how much evidence I had stored in safety deposit boxes under my maiden name. He still believed the version of me who cried quietly in kitchens and apologized first after every fight. He thought betrayal had made me weak. It had made me exact. My watch read 2:17 a.m. when Marcus knocked on my door. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. A blurry photo had just surfaced online. Carter and Melanie in Miami, time-stamped 48 hours ago. He'd told me he was in Boston for a board meeting. "Leak it," I said, through an anonymous burner. "Let it get to the press." By morning, the photo was already circulating on 2 gossip blogs and 1 local business rag. Hedge fund hero spotted in Miami with mystery brunette read the headline beneath a grainy image of Carter and Melanie wrapped around each other on a hotel balcony. The timestamp conflicted with the alibi he gave his board, something Rebecca was already preparing to exploit in court. Carter's vanity made him careless, always assuming optics wouldn't apply to him. What he never understood was that the illusion only worked if no one was watching. At 7:06 a.m., Rebecca called with her usual clipped efficiency. "You're going to the courthouse in an Uber," she said. "No Marcus, no entourage. You're a hurt woman, seeking help, not a fortress in sneakers." Optics again. Marcus was already suited up for surveillance duty, tailing Carter's route from his office to his high-rise condo. "He hasn't left yet," Marcus confirmed via text. "He's hungover and pacing." I dressed for the role I had to play. A modest blouse, jeans, minimal makeup, and the earrings Carter once said made me look too serious. My hair was pulled back into a soft, loose bun that made me seem smaller, more fragile, like the version of me he preferred. The courtroom wasn't for revenge, it was for leverage. I slipped the flash drive into the pocket of my crossbody bag and added the portable recorder, already loaded with the Rainside rest stop confession. Then I took a breath and ordered the Uber. The courthouse felt bigger than I remembered, its stone walls cold and indifferent, like the marriage I was ending. Rebecca met me at the entrance in a gray pencil skirt and a stack of folders under one arm. She didn't hug me, never did, but her nod said everything. "Judge Baker is presiding," she said, glancing at the docket. "He's old school but hates financial manipulation, especially against spouses." We filed the petition at 9:58 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Rebecca was obsessive about punctuality, her philosophy being that precision won cases long before arguments ever started. The clerk processed the documents, his eyes widening slightly at the volume of attachments. "You brought receipts," he murmured, handing me a stamped copy of the initial filing. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. By 10:30, Carter was blowing up my phone. Missed calls, voicemails, 3 text messages starting with, "We need to talk." Each one was carefully screenshotted and sent to Rebecca and Valentina. We wanted a complete record, not just for court, but for the larger case we were building. Carter was impulsive, and impulsive people made mistakes. We were documenting his unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, Marcus tailed Carter from his condo to his lawyer's office downtown. "He looks pissed," Marcus messaged. "Definitely just found out about the petition." He's yelling into his phone like a toddler who dropped his favorite toy. I imagined Carter's face going red, veins bulging, convinced he still had control. He'd never learned how to respond when the game changed without his permission. At noon, we regrouped at the safe house. Valentina had printed a full dossier of Carter's financial transactions over the past year. Every shell company, offshore wire, and falsified consulting invoice. We now had evidence he used company funds to pay for Melanie's travel, spa appointments, and what appeared to be breast augmentation under the alias C. Donovan. Rebecca circled each transaction with red pen, labeling them marital fraud. "We don't just win," she said. "We obliterate." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a name I hadn't seen in months. Kelsey Tan, one of Carter's former assistants. Her message was brief, but heavy with implication. "I've got emails you'll want to see. He made me delete things, but I saved the drafts. Can we talk?" I looked at Rebecca, who nodded before I could even finish reading. We met Kelsey at a coffee shop near the university library. Neutral territory with public cameras and lots of people. She looked nervous, eyes darting every few seconds, clutching a beat-up laptop like it was a life raft. "He never thought I was smart enough to keep backups," she said, opening her inbox. "But I sent copies to a dummy account the whole time. The things he said about you, Amanda, the things he planned." The drafts were damning, emails written but never sent, planning how to leak false stories about me to the press, coordinating with a friend at a PR firm to spread rumors about my mental health. In one, Carter outlined a strategy to, quote, "create public sympathy for an amicable split, painting her as fragile but noble." Another draft contained bullet points for a smear campaign, including false claims about substance abuse and paranoia. "I couldn't take it anymore," Kelsey said, tears brimming in her eyes. "He told me I was disposable, just like he said you were." I promised Kelsey anonymity, and Rebecca promised her legal protection. The emails would serve as proof of premeditated defamation, strengthening our petition and undermining any claims of mutual fault. Marcus drove Kelsey home while I sat in the back seat, scrolling through Carter's words on her laptop screen. There was no remorse in them, only strategy, control, and contempt. "He thinks the world bends," I muttered. "He's never seen it break." Back at the safe house, Valentina discovered a link between Carter's shell companies and one of his biggest investors. The investor, a 76-year-old retired surgeon named Harold Lynn, had placed $2.4 million into Carter's fund under the promise of social impact ventures. Instead, Carter routed the funds through an LLC registered in the Virgin Islands, using the money to renovate a beach house registered in Melanie's name. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her teeth. "If Harold cooperates, we get civil and criminal traction," she said. "He's old, rich, and pissed. The trifecta." I called Harold that evening, using the contact Rebecca had secured through a mutual friend at the Rotary Club. He answered on the second ring, voice clipped and angry. "I trusted that boy," he said before I even introduced myself. "He showed me photos of a fake school in Tanzania and told me I was changing lives. I let him vent, then explained what we had. Harold agreed to meet with our legal team the next day, bringing with him all communication from Carter's firm, including brochures, emails, and video presentations. Valentina prepped the files for forensic examination, looking for metadata, doctored timestamps, and inconsistencies. Carter had always been flashy, but this crossed into exploitation. "He didn't just steal," Valentina said. "He manipulated philanthropy for profit. That hits different in court." Rebecca filed a supplemental motion at midnight, attaching Kelsey's emails and Harold's affidavit. The filing would ensure the judge saw a complete picture of Carter's conduct, not just as a cruel husband, but as a dangerous liar and financial predator. We weren't just burning bridges now, we were detonating the whole road behind him. Carter had pushed me into a storm thinking I'd drown. Instead, I became the flood. Carter's attorney filed a motion to delay the hearing, citing mental distress due to unforeseen media harassment. The judge denied it within 3 hours, issuing a curt response about accountability and the public interest. Rebecca smirked when she read it. her red lipstick the only hint of levity on her otherwise severe face. "He's losing control of the narrative," she said. "Men like Carter don't handle that well." At 8:43 a.m., Marcus sent over video footage from outside Carter's office. It showed him screaming at his assistant, flinging a coffee cup against the wall before storming out into the rain. "He's unraveling," Marcus noted in the caption. "Going home now, probably to drink and sulk." I forwarded the clip to Rebecca, who immediately tagged it for future evidentiary use. Carter called me at 9:15 sharp, his voice low and urgent. "Amanda, this is ridiculous. Whatever you think you're doing, you're going to regret it." I hit record on my backup device, letting him hang himself one threat at a time. "I gave you everything," he continued. "And this is how you repay me?" "You left me barefoot in the rain," I replied evenly. "You called it a lesson." There was a pause, and I could hear him inhale sharply. "Don't twist this," he snapped. "I was trying to wake you up, make you see what you've become." I didn't reply, just ended the call and sent the recording to Rebecca. She added it to the folder labeled Coercion and Psychological Manipulation. It was already thick with transcripts from the house recordings Marcus had captured over the past 7 months. Moments where Carter told me to act sane before meetings, where he mocked my memory lapses. Moments I now knew were carefully orchestrated gaslighting. Valentina had even matched his voice commands to specific financial transactions, showing how he used emotional leverage before big fund withdrawals. "It's a pattern," Rebecca said, "and judges love patterns." At noon, we met Harold Lynn in person for the first time. He was wiry, weathered, and far more lucid than Carter had given him credit for. He walked in with a black binder of documents, each tabbed and dated. "I brought everything," he said. "If he fooled me, he's fooled others." Harold's documents included original emails from Carter promising monthly updates on the Tanzania Project, a non-profit that didn't exist. There were photos Carter had photoshopped, complete with fake children holding signs that read, "Thank you, Harold," in crayon. "I had this one framed," Harold admitted grimly, holding up the photo. "I thought I was changing lives." Rebecca's jaw tightened, and Valentina muttered a curse under her breath. Marcus verified that the image metadata had been altered, proving the photo was fabricated. That meant Carter wasn't just stealing, he was creating elaborate fictions to justify it. "This turns our civil case into criminal fraud," Rebecca said. "It's no longer just you, Amanda. He's built a system on lies." Harold agreed to testify on one condition: anonymity until the trial date. "My name still means something in this city," he said. "Let me protect it until I burn it down on the stand." Rebecca agreed and had him sign a confidentiality agreement on the spot. As he left, he turned to me and said, "You're not just fighting for yourself, you know. You're fighting for every fool who believed in him." That night, Marcus and I sat on the back porch of the safe house, rain falling gently on the roof. "He's going to come unglued soon," Marcus said, sipping coffee. "You need to be ready." I was already watching Carter's live location through a mirrored app synced from his smartwatch, a gift I'd given him last Christmas. He'd never figured out it connected to my cloud. "He's at the lake house," I murmured, watching the dot flicker on the screen. "He thinks he's safe there." Marcus leaned in to look, then raised an eyebrow. "That's the one he tried to transfer out of your name, right?" I nodded. "The paperwork's in the vault at the bank. Forged signatures and all." Valentina had traced the attempted transfer to a shady real estate firm Carter partially owned under a different name. The forged documents had been rejected twice, thanks to a savvy notary who flagged inconsistencies. Still, Carter had kept trying, rewriting history to suit his exit strategy. The judge would love that detail, especially when paired with the testimony we'd just secured from the notary. Carter's desperation was now visible in every move he made. He withdrew $40,000 in cash across 3 different accounts in a 24-hour period, and then wired another $15,000 to a private investigator in New Jersey. Marcus found the investigator's name on a license renewal registry and reached out through a burner phone. "He wanted dirt on you," the man admitted. Told me to find anything that would make you look unstable. Rebecca smiled when she heard. This is textbook projection. He's accusing you of what he's already doing. She added the private investigator's retainer agreement to our evidence pile. He's trying to dig his way out, but he's only making the hole deeper. Every action he took became another step toward his own implosion. At 3 a.m., a message came through from Melanie. She used an anonymous email account, but her tone gave her away. He's lying to me, she wrote. He said the marriage was over, that you were vindictive and controlling. Now I see the court filings. I want out. I forwarded it to Rebecca, who replied within minutes. Ask if she'll testify. If she's got anything, texts, voicemails, receipts, it strengthens our fraud claim. I hesitated, then replied to Melanie, careful to keep it unemotional. We're building a case. If you want to help, now's the time. She responded with 3 screenshots and a promise to send more. The screenshots were devastating. One showed Carter coaching her on what to say if questioned. You don't know me well. We're just friends. Play dumb. Another showed a bank transfer for $25,000 labeled consulting services, sent to her personal checking account. The last was a selfie of the two of them at the lake house, time-stamped during a week he'd claimed to be at a business retreat. He said no one would ever see this. Melanie had written, "We sent it all to the DA's office. Within hours, we got confirmation that they were opening a parallel investigation. This goes beyond divorce now," Rebecca said. "We're talking fraud, financial abuse, and conspiracy." I stared at the evidence, every pixel another nail in Carter's professional coffin. He left me in the rain to teach me a lesson. Instead, I taught him about consequences. By sunrise, Melanie had sent over 15 additional files, including a voice memo Carter left her after his board meeting meltdown. His voice was slurred, thick with arrogance and scotch. "Amanda's just making noise," he said. "She'll fold once she sees the prenup again. She's not built for real conflict." I forwarded it to Rebecca, who immediately flagged it for the forensic audio team. The prenup was our next battlefield, an outdated document written before Carter's hedge fund had even taken off. He'd kept it hidden, tucked behind a false panel in his office desk, which Marcus had located during one of his, quote, maintenance checks. It stated that if I ever filed for divorce without evidence of infidelity or abuse, I'd walk away with nothing. But the catch was in the language, intentionally vague, riddled with legal holes, and never updated after we began commingling assets. Valentina had already built a financial web, proving that almost every investment since year 2 had been joint. Rebecca drafted a motion to have the prenup declared null and void on grounds of financial manipulation and suppression of marital documents. She paired it with a declaration from Melanie confirming the affair and Kelsey's emails that showed intent to manipulate my behavior through threats and gaslighting. "He built this trap," Rebecca said, "but we've documented every wire he used." The motion was filed with the court clerk by 2 p.m., along with an emergency request to freeze all domestic and offshore accounts. Within hours, we had a judge's signature. Carter must have found out before we expected, because at 3:17 p.m., Marcus messaged me from the lake house stakeout. He just threw his phone into the lake. Seconds later, he sent a blurry image of Carter standing on the dock, hair wet, fists clenched, screaming at no one. "He's unraveling faster than expected," Marcus added. "He knows he's out of moves." At 4:40 p.m., a courier arrived at the safe house with a thick envelope. No return address, but I recognized Carter's handwriting instantly. Inside was a handwritten letter full of contradictions, apologies laced with accusations, begging paired with threats. "We don't have to do this in court," he wrote. "Think of the reputational damage. Think of the family legacy." There was no mention of love, just leverage. I handed the letter to Rebecca without saying a word. She scanned it and laughed softly, then handed it to Valentina. "He's still trying to negotiate from a throne that's already burned." Valentina shook her head. "He doesn't realize the court of public opinion has already sentenced him." Marcus walked in then, dropping a flash drive on the kitchen table. "Security footage from the lake house," he said. "You're going to want to see this." The video showed Carter pacing around the lake house's great room, drinking from the bottle, yelling into thin air. He called me names he'd never dared say to my face, ranted about judges being bought and biased, then started tearing framed photos off the wall. At one point, he screamed, "This was my empire!" and threw a lamp across the room. The footage caught everything in crystal clear 108 OP. "He just handed us our mental health rebuttal," Rebecca said calmly. I hadn't cried in weeks, but that night I did, alone, in the safety of my bedroom, watching the storm ease through the windows. They weren't tears of sorrow anymore. They were the kind that came after holding your breath for too long, the kind that carried release instead of regret. I let them fall, silent and warm, until my body finally exhaled. By morning, news had broken about Carter's misappropriation of funds from his firm's pension portfolio. A whistleblower inside the compliance department had leaked internal emails to a journalist from the Post. The headline read, "Rainmaker or Fraudster, Mitchell accused of draining employee retirement accounts." Carter's firm tried issuing a blanket denial, but screenshots don't lie. Rebecca called at the beginning of the end. The DA's office reached out before lunch with a request to interview me formally for the fraud investigation. I arrived at the municipal building dressed exactly like the Amanda Carter thought was easy to ignore. Neutral sweater, clean face, wedding ring still on, optics again. The investigator, a sharp woman named Carla, asked detailed questions about bank accounts, offshore transfers, and Carter's travel behavior. I answered each one calmly, offering documents and recordings at precise intervals. When the interview ended, Carla looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've built a better case than half our team ever has." It wasn't flattery, it was fact. I had folders for every lie, spreadsheets for every theft, and backup copies stored in 3 different cloud drives. "We'll be moving on criminal charges within a week," she added. "You'll be notified as a cooperating witness." Back at the safe house, Valentina confirmed that Melanie's final transfer, one labeled consulting, came from the exact same shell account Carter used to hide our marital funds. That meant Melanie had been paid directly with stolen money, not just affair perks. When we presented the findings to her, she sobbed quietly. "I thought he loved me," she said. "Turns out I was just part of the balance sheet." She agreed to sign a sworn statement and deliver all remaining texts, voicemails, and photos. She also confirmed that Carter had spoken about leaving the country if things got messy. That crossed into obstruction territory. Rebecca updated our filings again, this time flagging Carter as a potential flight risk. The judge approved a travel restriction within 2 hours. At 7:30 p.m., Marcus intercepted a call Carter placed to a known passport forger in Chicago. He'd used a burner phone, but Marcus's tech caught it and traced it. "He's officially trying to run," Marcus texted. "They'll issue a warrant before midnight." And they did. An emergency bench warrant with a sealed arrest affidavit. I watched it all unfold from the couch, phone in hand, tea going cold beside me. Carter never saw it coming. He thought the lesson was mine to learn. But standing barefoot in the rain that night, I'd already decided to stop being the student and start being the storm. At 3:18 a.m., Carter was arrested at a private airstrip 20 miles outside the city. He'd been trying to board a chartered flight with 2 duffel bags, one containing cash, the other filled with fake documents. When federal agents showed up, he reportedly asked if they knew who he was. They did, and more importantly, they knew who I was. I got the call from Carla at 3:41 a.m., her voice firm but not unkind. "He's in custody. No bail until the arraignment, and even that's unlikely with the flight risk designation." I hung up, heart pounding, not from fear, but from a strange, grounded kind of peace. Marcus stood in the hallway with 2 mugs of tea and a quiet nod. We both knew this moment was just the beginning. By 8 a.m., news of Carter's arrest was everywhere. Headlines, social media, even morning TV segments. High-profile hedge fund CEO apprehended in midnight arrest scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Journalists speculated about money laundering, Ponzi schemes, and the mysterious woman behind the takedown. They didn't know my name yet, but they would. Rebecca held a press briefing outside the courthouse at 11 a.m., sticking closely to the script. "We cannot comment on an active investigation, but Mrs. Mitchell is cooperating fully with authorities and looks forward to the legal process unfolding in full. She looked immaculate, composed, and slightly dangerous, exactly what we needed the public to see. By the end of the day, #Carter Mitchell was trending. So was #Grain Reckoning. Meanwhile, Valentina finalized a report tracing the entire financial ecosystem Carter had built over 3 years. Offshore accounts, dummy corporations, forged investment summaries. It was the kind of corruption people went to prison for decades over. Her spreadsheet was color-coded by severity, and it spanned 37 pages. "I stopped counting at $14.7 million, she said. "But we'll probably uncover more once the subpoenas go through." The next morning, I sat across from Carla in the federal building again, this time with 2 prosecutors and a transcriptionist present. They showed me documents and emails, asking for context and clarification. For 3 hours, I walked them through the anatomy of Carter's deception. He wasn't chaotic, I explained. He was methodical. Everything he did had a reason. By the end of the session, Carla looked visibly shaken. "You realize what you did, right?" she asked. "You built a case we couldn't have assembled in a year." I just shrugged. "I wasn't trying to build a case," I said. "I was trying to survive it." That's when she stopped writing and looked at me with something like respect. Later that afternoon, Rebecca filed the final petition for full dissolution of marriage, attaching an affidavit that included all sworn witness statements. She also filed for a restraining order, just to keep the optics aligned with the abuse narrative, even though Carter couldn't go anywhere. It was strategic, layered, and absolutely airtight. "You'll walk away with everything that matters," she told me, "and he'll walk into a cell." Marcus drove me to the courthouse for the formal hearing. Outside, reporters swarmed like bees, their voices a blur of questions I didn't answer. I wore a black sheath dress and the pearl earrings Carter gave me after our first anniversary, the same ones he'd later claimed made me look old. They shimmered under the sun like tiny declarations of irony. "Let them look," Marcus said. "They'll forget your face, but they'll remember your victory." Inside, Carter sat at the defense table in a wrinkled blazer and borrowed tie, hands cuffed and eyes sunken. He tried to catch my gaze, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. The judge entered, gavel in hand, and the room fell quiet. "We're here to address the matter of Mitchell versus Mitchell," she began. "A marriage reduced to documents and numbers. But behind every number is a choice, and behind every choice, a consequence." Rebecca presented our case with precision, walking the judge through every point without emotion. For each item, infidelity, financial abuse, attempted flight, she offered a corresponding exhibit. Emails, voicemails, photos, banking statements, eyewitness affidavits. Every time Carter tried to object, his lawyer pulled him back like a dog straining against a leash. "You taught her to be afraid," Rebecca said in closing. "She learned to be prepared." The judge took less than 20 minutes to deliberate. When she returned, her tone was clear and final. "The court finds in favor of Amanda Mitchell. The prenup is declared invalid. The marital assets are to be divided in accordance with equitable distribution laws, and all fraudulent transfers are reversed. Mr. Mitchell is hereby barred from contacting the petitioner in any form, directly or indirectly." Carter stood and tried to speak, but the judge cut him off. "You had your turn," she said, ice in her voice. "You used it to cause harm. Now you'll serve your sentence." As the bailiff led him away, he turned to me one last time, face twisted with disbelief. He still thought this was temporary. Outside the courtroom, Marcus handed me my phone. I had 17 missed calls, all from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, probably. Or investors. Or people Carter had burned who were now looking for someone to blame, or someone to thank. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on a bench in the courthouse garden, letting the afternoon sun soak into my skin. Rebecca sat beside me without a word, and Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed like the wall he'd always been. Valentina texted me a smiley face and the word, "Done." And somewhere behind us, Carter Mitchell was processed into the federal system. 3 days later, I gave my first public interview to a journalist from The Guardian. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, survival, and the way women rebuild after being told to stay small. "He left me in the rain," I said, thinking it would break me. I smiled, slow and deliberate. It baptized me instead. Before I narrate what happens next, please leave a comment about what you've enjoyed so far in the story, and let me know why you haven't subscribed yet. The article ran under the headline, "Wife of Hedge Fund CEO Speaks Out." The rain wasn't the cruelest part. It was shared over 1.2 million times within 48 hours, mostly by women who had lived through quieter versions of the same war. My inbox filled with stories, strangers sending paragraphs that bled with betrayal and resilience. The world finally saw Carter not as a genius investor, but as the predator he truly was, and me not as the passive wife, but the architect of his downfall. 2 weeks after the ruling, the Phoenix Foundation went from idea to mission. Rebecca, Marcus, and I turned one of Carter's seized properties into a recovery center for women exiting financial abuse. The building, a sleek 3-story townhouse he once used to impress clients, became our headquarters. The irony wasn't lost on me. He bought this with stolen money, Valentina said as we signed the lease, and now it's going to shelter women he'd call too emotional to handle money. Marcus oversaw the security systems personally: surveillance, panic buttons, encrypted locks. "No woman walks through these doors afraid," he said, tightening a bolt on one of the reinforced exit frames. Valentina converted the library into a forensics room, training staff to trace hidden assets and document abuse patterns. Rebecca coordinated pro bono legal teams from 3 different states. And I met with every woman who entered, not as a savior, but as someone who had survived. Our first resident was a teacher named Dana, whose husband had forged her signature to drain their retirement fund. He left her with 2 kids and a mountain of debt, and a restraining order that never stopped him from texting threats. Dana cried when she saw the clean sheets, the stocked fridge, the locked front gate. "I thought I'd have to stay," she whispered. "I thought I'd never be free." I gave her the room Carter once used to seduce investors. Within a month, we had 12 women in rotation, each one referred by crisis centers or legal aid groups. Some stayed for days, others for weeks, but everyone left stronger than when they arrived. Valentina recovered $240,000 in hidden funds from 4 different husbands. Rebecca won emergency support orders for 5 more. And Marcus taught a self-defense workshop that ended with laughter echoing through the very halls Carter once filled with silence. Jennifer, my sister, came to volunteer 2 months after Carter's sentencing. She'd been going to therapy regularly, finally facing the shame of how Carter had manipulated her gambling addiction. "He used me to spy on you," she admitted, "but I want to make it right." I let her start small, organizing donation drives, answering phones. Her voice, once shaky and unsure, grew steady over time. Jennifer was the one who suggested the financial literacy classes. "A lot of these women were never taught to manage money," she said. "It wasn't neglect. It was cultural." Valentina built a 6-week curriculum, and I watched as Dana taught the first class with a whiteboard and a fire in her voice. "Budgeting is power," she said. "And power is freedom." Carter would have scoffed. Meanwhile, the civil suits stacked up against Carter, 18 victims, each one a former investor who'd been misled, gaslit, or outright robbed. Rebecca represented 6 personally. The others had found counsel through our growing network of attorneys. The government froze another $2.3 million in assets, thanks to a second whistleblower from Carter's old firm. He'd been clever, but not as clever as the women he underestimated. Melanie testified again, this time in front of a grand jury. She wore a plain navy suit and no makeup, her voice quiet but sure. "He told me I was different," she said, "that I'd replace Amanda, that I was the upgrade." Her words became a turning point, not just for the case, but for public perception. Carter was no longer just a fraud. He was a user of people. That evening, Melanie stopped by the foundation unannounced, holding a thick envelope of donation receipts in my name. "I wanted you to know I'm not hiding anymore," she said. "I was wrong, but I'm trying to be useful now." I invited her in. She joined Jennifer in sorting hygiene kits, and the two of them laughed over which brands were best for curly hair. The world doesn't always give us second chances, but sometimes we build them for ourselves. At the 6-month mark, we held a small gathering in the courtyard of the Phoenix Foundation. Former residents came back with casseroles, folded letters, and tiny hands tugging on sleeves. One woman handed me a crayon drawing of a house with 4 windows and the words "Safe Now" scrawled in pink. I pinned it to my office wall, right next to a photo of me standing barefoot at the courthouse steps the day Carter was convicted. "This is the real legacy," I said to Rebecca. Carter's sentencing hearing came on a rainy Thursday, and I wore the same shoes I'd carried in my hand the night he left me at the rest stop. The courtroom was packed, investors, journalists, and more than a few former friends pretending not to stare. Carter looked thinner, older, as though the months had drained the smugness from his posture. But when the judge listed each count, fraud, obstruction, money laundering, he still smirked like a child being scolded. "Anything to say?" the judge asked. "I was trying to build something," Carter said. "You don't understand the pressure of being the only one who sees the future." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Funny," she replied, "because the women you harmed saw you clearly the entire time." Then she sentenced him to 24 years in federal prison, with no eligibility for parole until year 18. I didn't flinch. Afterwards, Marcus drove us back through the same stretch of highway where it all began. Rain pelted the windshield like a reminder. "Want to stop?" he asked as we passed the rusted rest stop sign. I nodded. We pulled in and parked. The lot was the same. Cracked pavement, broken vending machine, nature creeping back through neglect. But I was different. I walked barefoot across the same stretch of asphalt where Carter had abandoned me, only this time I wasn't afraid. Marcus stood nearby, silent as ever. I picked up a single pebble and threw it into the weeds. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "Not at him, not at me, not even at the rain." Marcus nodded, then handed me a thermos of hot coffee, just like that night. I took a sip and smiled. This is closure. We left the rest stop in silence. The rain soft now, like it had nothing left to prove. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the gear shift, his posture relaxed, but alert. It reminded me of how he'd been the first time I met him, quiet, steady, and already calculating 3 moves ahead. I had hired him for protection, but what I got was someone who never needed to raise his voice to make me feel safe. "You want to get lunch?" he asked as we merged onto the highway. "Somewhere that doesn't smell like mold and regret." We stopped at a diner about 12 miles outside the city. Formica counters, laminated menus, and a waitress named Sherry who called everyone on. I hadn't eaten here in years, but it used to be where Carter and I stopped on road trips before his money convinced him diners were beneath him. I ordered a BLT and a cherry soda just for the hell of it. Marcus didn't say much, just sipped his coffee and watched the parking lot like he always did. "You're different now," he said finally. "Not just free, different." I didn't answer right away. I stirred the straw in my soda and watched the bubbles rise. He wasn't wrong. Something had shifted in me, like all the pieces I'd spent years trying to shrink finally snapped back into place. I wasn't afraid of Carter anymore, or the way people had looked at me during our marriage like I was just his reflection. "I'm done apologizing for surviving," I said. "Now I want to build." When we got back to the foundation, Dana was teaching her 3rd financial literacy class, and 3 new women had arrived during our trip. One had been married to a pastor who siphoned money from their congregation. Another was a corporate executive whose husband locked her out of every shared account after she asked for a prenup revision. The third was 19, pregnant, and trying to escape a man 10 years older who insisted love meant control. They each unpacked slowly, like they were waiting for the walls to turn on them, but none of them did. Rebecca called later that evening to say that the FBI had officially closed the financial investigation. "He's done," she said. "No appeals, no bargaining, and the last of his offshore accounts have been absorbed into the Victim Restitution Fund. The victims, 19 total, would receive partial repayments starting next quarter. Melanie received a letter of immunity and now worked with a nonprofit in D.C. that advocated for women lured into financial manipulation through romantic coercion. "It's almost poetic," Rebecca said. "Everyone he tried to use is building something." I spent the next morning writing thank you letters to the judge, the agents, even the notary who flagged the lake house deed transfer. I didn't do it for optics or PR. I did it because, for once, I wanted people to know that their quiet integrity mattered. Marcus walked in with a box of handwritten notes from former residents, each folded into tiny rectangles. "You've got a wall full of strangers who think you saved them," he said. "You should read a few." One note simply said, "I learned how to leave." Another had a child's crayon drawing of a woman holding an umbrella over 3 smaller figures, the words, "Thank you, Miss Amanda," spelled in backwards letters. I couldn't hold back the tears this time, not out of sadness, but out of a kind of soul-deep gratitude I didn't know how to explain. I didn't cry for Carter anymore. I cried because I had become the person I once prayed would find me. Jennifer walked in on me mid-tear and immediately handed me a tissue and a cookie. "You always did cry over cards," she teased. "You cried when Mom sent you that weird birthday letter with all the underlined parts." I laughed and nodded, still dabbing at my eyes. "Cards feel permanent," I said. "Words that someone thought about before writing them down." Jennifer didn't argue. She just sat beside me in silence. Later that week, we got a surprise visit from Kelsey, the former assistant who saved those crucial emails. She looked good, confident, like someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission to be taken seriously. She brought pastries and a resume. "I want to work here," she said, setting both on my desk. "Not just volunteer. I want to build something that terrifies people like Carter." I hired her on the spot. No interview needed. She was already part of the Foundation's DNA. Over the next month, the Phoenix Foundation expanded into 2 more properties, one in Chicago and one in Atlanta, each led by former residents who had completed our 6-month transition program. Marcus traveled between the cities, overseeing security, while Valentina trained the new forensic teams. Rebecca stayed in Minneapolis, but agreed to fly out for any legal escalations. The structure was evolving, less like a center and more like a network. "This is what revolution looks like in heels," Jennifer joked during one team meeting. One of the most surprising developments came from Carter's former business partner, Elaine Chen. She reached out through Rebecca and offered to donate office furniture, conference tech, and $150,000 in seed money. "He shut me out because I told him I didn't trust what he was doing," she wrote in her email. "Now I want to invest in the people he tried to destroy." We accepted, of course, but made sure to run every item through our own legal filter before signing. That night, I walked the halls of the Phoenix Foundation alone, the way I often did when sleep refused to come. The walls were quiet, but not empty. They held stories now, whispers of strength, of plans made in the dark that finally saw daylight. In the kitchen, someone had left a sticky note on the fridge that read, "Be the storm that breaks their silence." I stuck it in my pocket. When I finally crawled into bed, the rain started again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a lullaby, and I slept. 3 months after Carter's sentencing, I received an official letter from the Department of Justice. Inside was a certification stating I was eligible for a whistleblower reward due to the financial crimes uncovered through my documentation. Valentina had filed the claim on my behalf, attaching everything we'd collected: transfers, recordings, offshore laundering. The final number was staggering: $2.3 million awarded directly to me. I stared at the paper for a long time, realizing the system had finally acknowledged what survival cost me. I didn't celebrate with champagne or a new car. Instead, I wired half of the money into the Phoenix Foundation's Emergency Housing Fund and the other half into an anonymous donor account for elder fraud recovery. Harold Lynn, the elderly surgeon Carter had scammed, was the first to receive notice that 80% of his stolen money had been recovered. He sent me a single email in response. "Thank you for turning your storm into someone else's roof." I printed it and taped it beside the crayon drawing on my office wall. Meanwhile, the foundation continued to evolve. Jennifer created a mentorship program that paired former residents with new arrivals, allowing them to offer guidance, reassurance, and strategy. The 19-year-old who'd come in scared and pregnant now led peer support sessions twice a week. Melanie returned for a panel discussion on financial coercion in romantic relationships and answered every question with the honesty of someone who no longer lived in shame. Dana got a full-time job at a credit union and donated her first paycheck back to the shelter. Every single one of them, in some way, was rewriting their narrative. Marcus began teaching a course called Tactical Calm, a weekly session on self-defense, boundary setting, and emotional regulation under pressure. The women adored it, not just for the skills, but because Marcus never spoke to them like victims. "Power isn't noise," he'd say. "It's knowing you can leave without explaining yourself." Sometimes, after class, they'd gather in the courtyard and talk for hours about exits, red flags, and the difference between being watched and being seen. They were rebuilding in real time. Rebecca was offered a book deal after a journalist overheard her arguing a case in court. At first, she refused, said she didn't want to be anyone's symbol. But then she realized the book could fund free legal services for survivors in 3 states. "If we're going to tell the story," she told me, "it's going to be ours, and it's going to hurt exactly the right people." She signed the contract and titled it Clause by Clause. One afternoon, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper and a check for $2,000. The note was from someone who only signed it T. It read, "You don't know me, but I watched the trial. I believed him at first. I was wrong. Please use this for someone better than I was." I added the check to our relocation fund and never looked back. As Carter settled into his 24-year sentence, news of his crimes continued to ripple through the financial sector. His name became a cautionary tale in ethics courses, and his former firm was restructured under a completely different brand. Elaine Chen took over as CEO and implemented a whistleblower-first policy with internal audits every quarter. The company began offering educational stipends to women interested in finance, crediting the courage of victims in their mission statement. When Elaine sent me a formal thank you card, she included a donation of $250,000 and a single sentence: "We've cleaned the rot from the walls you exposed." My mother, who had remained mostly quiet through everything, came to visit the foundation on a warm afternoon in early spring. She stood in the hallway for a long time, eyes scanning the photos, notes, and framed articles. "I remember the day you married him," she said quietly. "I knew something was wrong, but you looked so sure." I didn't correct her. Some things don't need retelling, only replacing. We sat in my office for an hour, sipping tea as she read through the testimonials binder Jennifer had created. She cried softly at a few of them and laughed at others. "You know," she said, "you used to cry when you spilled milk. Now people come to you when their whole lives are falling apart." I smiled at that. Maybe I just learned which things are worth crying over. That night, as I walked through the courtyard, I found a journal left behind on a bench. Inside were pages filled with sketches of women standing tall beside broken cages. One drawing showed a figure holding an umbrella, rain hitting her but never soaking her. In the corner of that page was a name I didn't recognize, someone who must have passed through quietly but left something powerful behind. I added the journal to our memory shelf. Our annual fundraiser was held at the old train station downtown. Glass ceiling, rusted beams, fairy lights wound through the rafters. Over 400 people showed up, including 5 judges, 2 state senators, and a local artist who painted a mural of a woman walking out of fire. Melanie gave the opening speech. Dana gave the closing. And I stood in the middle, shaking hands and answering questions and smiling in a way that felt entirely mine. Near the end of the night, Marcus found me by the punch table. "You know," he said, "when I took this job, I thought it would be a 6-month gig." I laughed. "You thought I'd fold?" He shrugged. No, I just didn't realize storms could build houses. As the evening ended, I stood on stage and thanked everyone, not with a speech, but with a reading. I pulled a folded paper from my purse, one I'd carried since the trial. It was a line from one of Carter's last emails to me, written right before the arrest. "You'll regret making this public. You'll be nothing without my name." I looked up, eyes steady. Turns out I was always more than his. A week after the fundraiser, we received a call from a national documentary producer who had followed the trial since Carter's arrest. She wanted to make a limited series about the Phoenix Foundation, not just my story, but all the women who had walked through our doors and found a way out. At first, I was hesitant. Attention often felt like exposure, not celebration, but Jennifer said something that changed my mind. "You used to be afraid of being seen. Now you can choose how." We agreed to 3 episodes, all on our terms, with full creative control and anonymity protections for any resident who requested it. Filming began in late April, with Marcus reluctantly appearing on camera only when bribed with coffee and silence clauses. Melanie's episode was raw and compelling, especially when she said, "He called Amanda the problem." But I was the excuse. Dana, in her segment, pulled out her original eviction notice and said, "I thought that was the end. It wasn't. It was my start." The crew cried more than once. Valentina's episode was more technical, screens filled with graphs, money trails, and court exhibits. But when she looked directly into the lens and said, "Abuse can wear a suit and tie," the air in the room changed. She mapped Carter's schemes like an architect of consequence. "He underestimated paper trails," she added, "but paper doesn't lie." The director later said it was the most downloaded episode of the series. As the documentary aired, our inbox exploded. Donations poured in, along with volunteer applications, survivor stories, and offers from law schools wanting to add financial abuse case studies to their curriculum. Rebecca created a resource hub using the footage, and we added it to our onboarding packet for new residents. People who had never heard of coercive control were finally learning its language. Women who thought they were alone now had proof that patterns could be broken. "Stories save people," Jennifer whispered to me one night. "We just gave the world one with a roadmap." 2 months after the series finale, I received a handwritten letter from Carter's mother. I recognized the slanted cursive before I even opened it. Inside was a single page that read, "I raised a man I don't recognize anymore. I blamed you because it was easier than blaming myself, but you were right to walk, and braver still to rise." There was no return address, just a signature, Margaret. I didn't respond, but I didn't tear it up either. I placed it in the back of my drawer under files labeled Case Archive. Mitchell, some things didn't need action, just acknowledgement. Margaret had lost a son to ego and deception, and for once, she didn't pretend otherwise. Meanwhile, Marcus began training a second team of security staff for the Phoenix expansion. His approach was quiet, thorough, and always centered on consent and safety. "You're not here to save anyone," he told the trainees. "You're here to make sure she has time to save herself." They hung on to every word. And when he walked the perimeter of our new Chicago location with a clipboard and a calm stare, I realized he wasn't just protecting us, he was building a legacy. One night in early summer, we hosted a survivor reunion at the Minneapolis campus. 47 women returned, each with their own milestone. New jobs, new homes, custody victories, degrees in progress. Some brought kids, others brought partners who understood boundaries and trust. There was music, laughter, and one spontaneous dance circle on the lawn. I stood off to the side with a cup of ginger tea and watched a life I never thought I'd get to live. Rebecca gave a toast halfway through the night, raising her glass and saying, "To the women who are never broken, just misfiled." The crowd erupted in applause. Melanie hugged Jennifer like they'd been sisters all along. Dana pulled me into a picture with the 19-year-old who now ran her own Etsy business selling trauma-informed journals. And Marcus, in his signature quiet way, handed out homemade bookmarks with each guest's name burned into the leather. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I walked the garden path behind the main house. That was where the idea for the foundation had first formed. Just me, a journal, and a fear that no one would believe me. Now the fear had been replaced with something deeper. Not peace exactly, but purpose. I had walked through hell in heels, and now I helped others choose their own shoes. Back inside, Kelsey approached with her tablet and a nervous smile. "There's a letter addressed to you," she said. "Came through the Foundation's website, but it's weird." I took the tablet and read the message slowly, each line unmistakably Carter's. "I'll be out someday," it read. "And when I am, you'll regret taking everything." My pulse didn't spike. My breath didn't catch. I simply handed the tablet back and said, "Flag it. File it. He's still not worth the rain." Rebecca contacted the prison immediately, and within hours, Carter's digital privileges were suspended. The message didn't warrant fear. It warranted documentation. Carla from the DOJ called the next morning to confirm an internal investigation. "He always did like testing boundaries," she said, "but now they're made of steel and locks." We updated his file with the threat, then went back to work. That same afternoon, Marcus installed a new sensor system in my office, just as a precaution. "Can't stop ghosts from rattling," he said, "but we can make sure they never cross the threshold." I nodded, knowing he wasn't just talking about walls. Some ghosts weren't Carter. Some were me, versions I'd shed but hadn't buried. Yet. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and the same coat I wore the night he left me. It still smelled faintly of stormwater and pine, but now it carried something else, proof that I got out. I watched the clouds pass without dread, listened to the thunder roll like a faraway song. It wasn't a threat, it was punctuation. Tomorrow, we'd welcome 3 more women and begin 3 more stories. They'd come in frightened, maybe even silent, wondering if starting over was a myth. And I'd sit across from them, smile gently, and say what I now knew with all certainty. You're not starting over, you're starting forward. The next morning, I stood in the front hallway of the Phoenix Foundation, clipboard in hand, as 2 new residents arrived. One was a pharmacist from Montana who'd been locked out of her accounts after confronting her husband's second mortgage. The other was a woman from Wisconsin whose partner had placed tracking devices in her car and erased her phone contacts. Both women looked exhausted, cautious but still carrying the tiniest flicker of hope behind their eyes. I greeted them with warmth and facts, not platitudes. "We don't fix you here," I said. "We help you reclaim what never should have been taken." They followed Jennifer down the corridor, their duffel bags slung over slumped shoulders, their shoes soaked from the drizzle outside. Rain was falling again. Not hard, not threatening, just steady. It was the kind that used to trigger my nerves, but now it sounded like renewal. Kelsey handed me the intake reports, and I skimmed them, already filing details in my head. Bank names, court dates, custody concerns. "You used to flinch when it rained," she said gently. "Now you move faster." Rebecca arrived before noon for a board strategy meeting, her legal pads covered in ideas for outreach. She suggested expanding into rural areas with limited legal access and increasing partnerships with medical providers to identify hidden financial abuse. Valentina, always armed with spreadsheets and digital audits, presented a case for a mobile unit, an RV equipped with scanners, secure Wi-Fi, and on-call investigators. Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and nodded once. "If we're building bridges," he said, "we better know how to drive over rivers." The board voted unanimously in favor of the expansion. Plans were drawn up that same week, and by the following month, the Phoenix Mobile Initiative was a fully funded project. One of Carter's seized vehicles, his prized Escalade, was repurposed into our first mobile office, its sleek exterior now wrapped in our foundation's logo and mission statement. I took the first drive out with Marcus and Jennifer, visiting 3 counties in 2 days. Every place we stopped, women came forward, their voices quiet but finally heard. One woman handed me a napkin scribbled with passwords and account numbers, tears streaking her cheeks. "He thinks I don't know what he's doing," she whispered. "But I watch everything." Another held a baby on her hip while reciting bank balances from memory, fear carved deep into her voice. Every story was different, but every story started with someone who'd been made to feel like silence was safer. That night I journaled under soft light in a motel room. Window cracked open to let in the smell of summer rain. I wrote about resilience, not as a trait, but as a muscle that had to be torn before it grew. I wrote about Carter, not in anger, but in truth. He was my turning point, not my definition. And I wrote about the women who walked through our doors every day, carrying grief and grit in equal measure. Marcus knocked on the door just before midnight, holding 2 coffees and a manila envelope. "We got another batch of testimonials," he said. Kelsey compiled them. We sat on the floor reading them together, surrounded by crumbs from gas station cookies and paperwork that smelled faintly of printer ink. One letter ended with, "I used to think survival meant staying. Now I know it means leaving smart." I folded it twice and tucked it into my coat pocket, right beside the sticky note from the fridge. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a conference in Washington, D.C., the National Symposium on Economic Abuse Prevention. I stood on a stage flanked by advocates, judges, and lawmakers, all waiting for me to speak. I wore the Navy suit Carter once called too masculine and the watch I'd bought myself with the first whistleblower reward check. The lights were hot, but my voice didn't shake. "Financial abuse doesn't always look like bruises," I said, "but it breaks just the same." The audience rose to their feet when I finished, applause crashing like thunder across the room. Afterward, a senator approached and asked for my input on pending legislation. A college student from Georgia hugged me and said, "My mom's going to leave him now because of your story." A prosecutor handed me his card, saying he'd shown our documentary in his last jury trial. And Rebecca, watching from the side, simply nodded, like she'd known this day was inevitable. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the city, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. The skyline sparkled with ambition, but I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I wasn't running, hiding, or trying to be heard. I was building, and the blueprint had started in the rain. Back in Minneapolis, the Phoenix Foundation celebrated its 1-year anniversary with an open house. The courtyard was strung with lights again, and the garden smelled like basil and lilacs. Dana's son toddled across the lawn in tiny boots, Melanie read poetry from her first published chapbook, and Jennifer organized a table of welcome kits filled with hand cream, flashlights, and hope. A woman from our very first intake brought her new girlfriend and donated $1,000 in cash, whispering, "This is for whoever walks in next." And I, standing near the front gate in flats and a sundress, finally exhaled. Toward the end of the night, a thunderstorm rolled in suddenly, and the wind scattered petals and flyers across the gravel path. Some people shrieked and ran under the awnings, but others just stood and watched. I stayed in the middle of the courtyard, letting the rain soak through my dress, face tilted to the sky. Marcus walked over slowly, holding an umbrella, but he didn't open it. "You're not walking through this one alone," he said. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was full circle. 1 year ago, I had been barefoot on cracked asphalt, heart bruised and shaking from the cold. Now I stood in the rain, surrounded by people I'd fought beside and built with, feeling stronger than I ever had in heels or silence. The rain hadn't broken me then. It baptized me, then bowed. As the storm passed and the clouds peeled away, a soft orange glow lit the sky. Someone turned the music back on, a slow jazz tune that curled through the damp air like incense. I danced barefoot across the flagstones, my hair clinging to my neck, my hands light at my sides. I thought of Carter, somewhere in a locked facility, still blaming, still raging, still losing. And I thought of every woman he underestimated. He left me in the rain to teach me a lesson, and I became the shelter. Thank you for listening to Amanda's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.